but it's not being called out to the pleasure of Allah. The angel of death is calling it out to the punishment of Allah and to the anger of Allah. So the soul will disperse throughout the body, trying to cling on to every nerve and every muscle, because it does not want to leave. So the angel of death will be pulling that soul out of the body. The Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he said that the pain of that soul is like a branch filled with thorns being pulled out of a wet ball of wool. Imagine you're pulling out a branch that is full of thorns, and that wrapped around it is a wet ball of wool. If you're trying to pull this branch, or this thorny branch, out of a wet ball of wool, and it is the same way the soul is being torn out of the body, pulled out of the body, and it's tearing apart the nerves and the muscles of that person. And this is the pain and the agony of death, because that soul does not want to come out. And so it's being pulled out, and it's coming out the same way as if you were pulling a branch, a thorny branch, out of a wet ball of wool. Remember, the soul of the believer, of the righteous person, when it's called out, the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he said it comes out so easily, it is like a drop of water falling from a jug, like pouring a drop of water from a jug. So easily and smoothly it will come out, because that soul is coming out through the promise of the pleasure of Allah. But for the evildoer, for the non-believer, that soul is being called out to the punishment and the anger of Allah. And so it will not want to leave. It will try to cling on, but it will be pulled out. The angel of death will pull it out. And the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, said, it is like pulling a thorny branch out of a wet ball of wool. Then, as soon as that soul comes out, all of the angels would jump and would wrap it up in a coffin from hellfire, and then they would carry it up through the heavens. The Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he says that it has a stinking and rotten smell. The soul of the disbeliever, the evildoer, it has a rotten and stinking smell. And whenever this soul would pass or passes by any group of the angels, they would start to curse it. And they would say, whose soul is this? They would be cursing this soul because of its stench, its rotten smell, and they would be cursing it and asking, whose soul is this? And so the angels would call him by his worst names. This is the soul of so-and-so, and calling that person, calling that soul by its worst names. Then it would be the angels would carry that soul up to the first heaven from our dunya, the first heaven from our world, the lowest heaven, and they would seek permission to enter. But the door of that heaven will not open, and the doors of that heaven will not be open for that soul. Then Allah will say, throw that soul to the lowest earth. Permission will not be granted for it to enter even the lowest heaven. And Allah will command, throw that soul to the lowest earth. So that soul will be thrown down by the disgrace of Allah. So now the soul is in the grave. The soul is, whether it's the evil soul, the soul of the disbeliever, the soul of the believer, it is now back in the grave. The soul of the disbeliever is back in the grave with the promise of the anger and the punishment of Allah, where the soul of the believer is back in the grave with the promise of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we will start to look now at the next section of Al-Akhirah, which is the Qabr, Al-Qabr, the grave. The next step in Akhirah being the grave. Uthman ibn Affan, may Allah be pleased with him, whenever he saw a grave, he would cry. Anytime Uthman, he saw a grave, he would start to cry. And so the people, they asked him, how come when you remember Jannah, paradise and the hellfire, that doesn't affect you like when you remember the grave? How come you think about paradise, you remember hellfire, you remember Akhirah, you remember Jannah and Nar, but this doesn't affect you the way it affects you when you see the grave? Uthman, he said that, I heard the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, say that the grave is the first step of Akhirah. The grave is the first step in the hereafter. If you make it through it, then whatever comes after it will be easier. And if you cannot make it through the grave, then whatever will happen after it is worse. It is progressively worse. And that is why I cry whenever I remember the grave. He was crying because the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he remembered that he said that the grave is the first step in Akhirah. And that if you make it through the grave, if the grave is easy for you and you pass through easily the tests and the trials and tribulations, if it's easy on you, then whatever comes after will be easier. But if it's difficult for you and you do not make it through this time, through this part of Akhirah, through the grave, then whatever will happen after it will be worse and worse and worse. And he said, this is why I cry whenever I see a grave. Because he realized that this is the first step towards Akhirah. And that this is the point by which if things are good for me in the grave, things after will be good for me and will be easier. But if things are difficult for me in the grave, then everything after it will become worse and worse and worse. Then he said that the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, said that everything horrific that I have seen, the grave is more horrific. The Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he's saying that everything that I have seen in my life, nothing is as worse as what I have seen in the grave. Anything that I've seen, however horrific anything that I've seen in my life, in this world, the grave is more horrific. So pretty soon, we are going to be there. Every one of us, each and every one of us, we're going to leave the comfort of this dunya, we're going to leave the comfort of this world, and we're going to leave it behind, and we're going to be there. We're going to be in the grave. Every single one of us, one day, we will be carried, and we will be put in that hole in the ground. Every single person born into this world will leave this world, and they will go into this grave. And the grave is dark. The Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he tells us that the grave is dark. There was a woman who used to clean the mosque in the time of the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, and she was an old woman, and she would come to clean the mosque. And then later on in her life she became ill, and one night, late at night, she died due to this illness. And so the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, they buried her, but they did not wake up the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, because it was late at night and they didn't want to disturb him. So then later on, the Prophet, he asked, where is that old woman? He didn't see her coming and cleaning the masjid. He asked, where is that old woman? And they said that she became ill and she died and we buried her. The Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he said, why didn't you call me? The Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he was the father of the ummah, and he cared about every single one of them. Every single person in the ummah, he had a great care for. He cared for the weak, as well as the strong, and for the young and the old, the man and the woman. He had a concern for each and every one of them. And so the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, he asked the companions, why didn't you wake me up? And then he asked them to show me her grave. So he went and visited her grave, and then he said, these graves are dark, but Allah is going to give them light because of my salah on them. This is from a hadith recorded by Bukhari. The graves are dark, but Allah is going to give them light, is going to light them up, is going to enlighten them because of my salah on them. This is from a hadith again from Imam Bukhari. With that, dear viewers, we'd like to end for this episode. We hope that you've enjoyed it and hope that you will continue to join us in the future. Until the next time, we bid you all farewell. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.